Dr. Rive Exel had encountered strange physiology before. The Jorland triplets with dual vascular loops, the crystalline circulatory system of the Talthis, even the gelatinous myocore of the Devrathi, which reformed after trauma like liquid marble. But humans? They were supposed to be simple. That was why, when a human male was dragged into OR-6 aboard the orbiting Coalition medical platform, Rive's expectations were low. The man had been recovered from a ground skirmish on Delta Kelvin 4. Debris zone, 2 collapsed buildings, casualties on both sides. The field team reported minor contusions, possible rib fractures, and heavy exposure to kinetic shock. Standard of that. The triage scans came first. Multiple subdermal contusions, spinal impact, fractured left ulna. But then the secondary diagnostics returned. Bone density off the charts. Trace metal readings lit up across the thoracic cavity, spine, and both forearms. Rive narrowed his eyes. "That's not debris." "Confirmed," the nurse replied, adjusting the scan. "The signal's uniform, regular spacing, cross-linked." "Foreign implants?" "No, these aren't grafted. They're integrated into the osseous matrix, fully fused." Rive paused. "Pull a deeper overlay. I want composition and distribution mapping." It took 30 seconds. The screen blinked. Thoracic cage, 14 rib structures reinforced with titanium-laced ceramic alloys. Spinal column, modified vertebrae with steel-reinforced laminae, and polymer nanotube bracing along the lumbar curve. Forearms, radial and ulnar cores lined with high tensile scaffolds. The human was awake on the gurney, eyes open, breathing steady. "Vitals are holding," the tech said. "Sedation levels minimal. Do you want us to increase?" Rive approached. The human met his eyes. "Name?" Rive asked. "Logan Brooks." "You're aware you sustained a blunt impact to the back and arm?" "Yeah." Wall came down. "Do you feel pain?" Brooks exhaled slowly, more annoyed than hurt. Rive glanced at the scan again. "You're reading as full skeletal reinforcement." Brooks smiled. "That's about right." The nurse stepped in. "What kind of reinforcement? Is this military-grade bioarmor, implant sleeves?" Rive tapped the scan. "No, these aren't implants. There's no surgical trace. The metal is inside the bone tissue, grown, not inserted." Brooks shrugged. "Some parts were grown, some weren't." Rive froze. "Are you telling me this was intentional?" "Upgrades," Brooks said, still grinning. "You let someone put metal into your skeleton voluntarily?" "Put it in myself, mostly." Silence settled across the surgical team. Rive leaned closer. "You did this to yourself?" "Kinda had to. You ever been dropped in a supply line with nothing but a med kit and some wire?" Rive blinked. "That's not a valid justification." "It is, if you've got 4 broken ribs, no splints, and a deadline." The scanner buzzed again. Rive tapped the femoral region. "Even your hips are reinforced." "Yeah, took a fall during orbital re-entry a few years ago. Didn't want to repeat the experience with unbraced legs." "You modify your bones to survive impact?" "Better than dying," Brooks said, "and cheaper than armor." Rive backed away. "Your marrow, it still functions?" "Mostly. Had to adapt intake. Iron metabolism's weird. But it works." The surgeon shook his head. "You destabilized your own osteogenic balance just to brace for trauma." Brooks raised an eyebrow. "You ever fight on the ground when the medics ran out of splints?" Rive couldn't answer. The nurse whispered, "How many other humans are like this?" Brooks grinned wider. "No idea. I stopped keeping count after my second war." The surgical bay went quiet again. Rive turned back to the scans. He could see the tiny ridges where old fractures had healed against the metal. He could trace the weld patterns where ceramic had bonded to living bone. It wasn't just augmentation, it was adaptation. Voluntary, self-imposed, brutal, and effective. Are you in pain now? Rive asked. Brooks shrugged. Only when I breathe hard. And you walked here under your own power? Didn't want to waste a stretcher. Rive's hand hovered over the tablet. He didn't log it. Not yet. He stared at Brooks, then at the scan, then at the steady pulse trace that ticked by like it had nowhere else to be. Seal the scans, Rive ordered. Restricted classification. Doctor? The nurse asked. Flag it as high security. Submit only to Central Medical Command. And the logs? Rive looked at Brooks again. The man had survived a building collapse. Walked in with fractured bone, metal composite ribs, and a dislocated arm. Still upright, still alert, still smiling. We'll keep this quiet, Rive said. Brooks tilted his head. Smart. Why do all this to yourself? One of the junior interns finally asked. Why do all this to yourself? Brooks exhaled through his nose. Because some days, survival isn't luck, it's preparation. Rive closed the file, and a new medical directive was issued that same cycle. Never assume they're unarmed. Not even on the inside. The medical directive spread quietly through the coalition's internal networks. There was no press release, no formal statement, just a line tucked into a surgical policy update distributed to all species-cleared trauma wards. Human skeletal anomalies. Assume potential internal reinforcement unless proven otherwise. Dr. Rive Exel returned to his station 2 shifts after his encounter with Logan Brooks, still not entirely convinced what he had seen hadn't been a fever dream. The scans were encrypted, access restricted to level 5 or above. Even the attending staff from OR 6 had been reassigned. But Rive couldn't unsee it. Her rib trace, layered with alternating ceramic and living tissue. The spinal supports, bonded, not grafted. And the forearm, a matrix of titanium thread woven into the cortical bone like lattice work, designed to absorb recoil. The next morning, he received a quiet message from a secure terminal. Subject Brooks, recovery progressing. Reassigned to planetary ops. Request for follow-up, decline. Declined. That stuck in Rive's mind. The coalition didn't deny follow-up diagnostics, unless the subject belonged to a special clearance tier, which meant Brooks wasn't just an augmented soldier. He was a classified one. 3 days later, Rive's surgical ward received a new casualty intake. Human, mid-30s, blunt force trauma from an impact crash during atmospheric re-entry. Standard procedure, assess, stabilize, scan. Until the scanner froze. The triage nurse squinted. Doctor, you need to see this. Rive leaned over. Another one. Spinal reinforcements, this time fused to the sacrum and pelvic ring. Both tibiae reinforced along the anterior shaft. Mild fissures at the femur head, but already calcifying faster than normal. The bone density again skewed absurdly high. The name on the intake tag read Devon Miles. Conscious, lucid, sedated only for pain control. Rive entered the med bay cautiously. Miles looked up from the bed. So, which bones surprised you this time? You've been modified. Miles grinned. Upgrades. You volunteered? Installed some myself. Field kit with a bone saw and a few stabilized rods. You opened your own leg. Twice. Left knee tore during a sprint through low gravity. Couldn't wait for evac. Rive's mind reeled. You bolted titanium inside your own femur? Polycoated composite, actually. Titanium cracks under lateral stress. You aren't a medic. It was after that. Rive took a long breath. How many like you are out there? Miles just chuckled. Depends what counts. No formal medical team cleared this. Your bone marrow shows signs of heavy stress. I cycle iron supplements and eat a horrifying amount of spinach. It evens out. Rive turned away and scrubbed his face with one trembling hand. This wasn't a fluke. This was a pattern. A quiet, brutal pattern of survivalist self-upgrading that no alien species had seen before. It wasn't mandated. It wasn't uniform. It wasn't even advertised. It was learned, taught, adapted. Rive did what any responsible surgeon would do. He called a meeting. 5 other senior xenomedical researchers attended. All had treated humans. All had dismissed earlier signs of augmentation as anomalies or rare trauma recoveries. Riv presented the scans. First Brooks, then Miles, then a third set, unidentified, pulled from a shipyard intake archive, showing reinforced fingers and modified scapula joints. He explained the voluntary nature of the alterations, the self-administered procedures, the chemical workarounds to keep marrow active, the pain tolerance required to survive unmedicated bone work. He didn't try to scare them. He just showed them the facts. When the lights came up, no one said a word. Finally, a Brillari trauma chief leaned forward. "We train for surgical excellence, they train for surgical necessity." Riv nodded. "And they never tell us." "They don't need to." Another surgeon whispered, "What kind of war teaches this?" No one answered. Back in OR 6, Rive re-examined the sterilized equipment. He asked his assistant to bring a high-resolution set of archived scan overlays from his earlier human patients. Of the last 14, 6 had bone anomalies. Not full reinforcements, but irregular density spikes. 1 had tiny pins along the wrist bones. Old, clearly not implanted by machine. Another showed microfracture fusion in patterns too symmetrical for nature. It wasn't new. They'd just never looked for it. Reeve leaned back in his chair and muttered, "They've been doing this all along." That same hour, a call came through from Central. Level 6 authorization. A request. If another such human presents with structural reinforcement, initiate no surgical intervention. Observe only. Then report. Verbally. It was not phrased as a suggestion. Rive saw Logan Brooks again 12 days later. He was not a patient. He was walking into the station's combat recovery unit in full gear, sleeves rolled, scars visible on both arms. "Back on your feet?" Riv asked. "Hard to stay off them. You returned to active duty without clearance?" Brooks chuckled. "Clearance was a formality. I had work." "You're still healing." "I've healed worse." Riv watched him. "Why don't you tell people what you are?" "Because what I am isn't about them. You scare people." "We don't mean to. We just survive a little louder than most." Rive stood silent, then asked, "Do you think this is sustainable? What happens when your marrow fails, when the body can't keep up?" Brooks looked at him, not cruelly, but with the calmness of someone who had thought that question through 100 times. "Then we find another way to stay standing." That evening, Riv updated the internal directive again. Do not assume human skeletal integrity correlates with recorded scans. Assume adaptation. Confirm intent. Confirm consent. Do not remove or alter reinforced tissue unless necessary for survival. He wrote one final line, not for policy, but for clarity. They're not augmented, they're prepared. Dr. Rive Exel's surgical suite took on a new rhythm. Each incoming human was scanned twice, first for injuries, then again for structural anomalies. The second scan wasn't logged through the standard system anymore. It was routed to a secured local buffer. His team learned not to ask questions, only to check the composition overlays for anything unnatural. The results came in with startling consistency. Reinforced metacarpals, hardened vertebral arches, tibial struts that didn't match standard human osteology. Every third human patient showed evidence of internal modification, some surgical, others more improvised. Some had precise metal sleeves laced with ceramic coating, others rough-looking inserts that had fused into the surrounding bone tissue unevenly. A field tech whispered once during a scan review, "It's like they're expecting their bodies to break." Riv had no answer for that. Not yet. Then came the incident at Dockery 12. An inbound cargo shuttle spun out during atmospheric approach. Emergency thrusters failed. The vessel slammed into the outer decking with such force the hull split across 4 compartments. 6 crew were pulled from the wreck. One, a human, crawled out on his own. Reeve was on call when the trauma beacon lit up. The man arrived on a stretcher, half his jumpsuit fused to his skin, blood loss severe, multiple fractures, no loss of consciousness. "Name?" Riv asked. "Carter. Miles Carter?" He walked out of a downed shuttle with a shattered femur. Carter coughed. Had to get to the others, couldn't wait. His leg was a mess. Compound fracture, mid-shaft, splintered edges. But when Rive reviewed the field scan, he saw it. A partial titanium core threaded through the femur. Fractured, but still holding structural line. It had kept the bone from fully separating. "You reinforced this leg." 3 years ago, training drop went wrong. Didn't want to risk it again. No support team approved this. Carter's face tightened. They were 10 hours away. I was 15 minutes from bleeding out. Riv nodded slowly. "Do you know how much marrow loss you've risked?" "Yeah," Carter said, "but I also know I'm still breathing." He went into surgery. Standard stabilization. Rive repaired the break, aligned the fragments, and wrapped the whole segment with external fixators. The metal insert had to stay. It was already too fused to remove without compromising the periosteum. Carter came to post-op with shallow breath and a dry throat. Rive stood over him. "Why do you do this?" Riv asked. "Why make yourself more breakable in the name of being harder to kill?" "It's not about being unbreakable," Carter rasped. "It's about walking 1 more minute than the guy next to you." Rive stayed quiet. The marrow biopsy showed signs of cellular adaptation, high iron turnover. Secondary marrow sites had become active. Flat bones mostly. The system was compensating. The body adjusted because the mind had demanded it. A week later, a new division of the Coalition Medical Oversight Board dispatched 2 observers to Rive's surgical unit. Their insignia was civilian, but the way they spoke carried military tone. "Dr. Exel," said the lead, "we're compiling a report on human anatomical variants. We want your logs." "You won't find what you're looking for in logs." The assistant raised an ocular ridge. "Excuse me?" "They don't report the behavior." The observers exchanged a glance. "I need to show you something," Rive said. He walked them through a private data suite, logged into the encrypted diagnostic buffer, and pulled up patient files. Not just Brooks or Miles or Carter, but 12 others. 12 humans with skeletons reinforced by choice, not biology. Some clinical, some desperate, all effective. He explained how marrow reconstitution was achieved with micro-regulators, how some managed blood calcium through improvised chelation cycles, how pain wasn't dismissed, it was managed, studied, integrated into daily movement. "They aren't just surviving," Reeve said. "They're preparing for conditions we don't want to imagine." The observers said little, but they took every file. When Carter left the medical wing, he walked slowly but unassisted. His leg was partially braced, but he refused crutches. Rive caught up to him outside the station's east concourse. "You know you'll need to get that femur rebuilt someday," Rive said. Carter looked down at his leg. "Maybe, but not today. You're already compensating on your other side." "I'll switch knees if I have to." "You sound like Logan Brooks." Carter smiled. "That guy still out there?" "Last I heard." Carter paused at the checkpoint gate. "You want to know why we do it?" he asked, turning halfway. Rive nodded. "Because when you've got nothing left in your hands, you've still got your bones. Might as well make them worth something." Then he left. Rive stood by himself at the station's viewport for a long time that night. The stars drifted by slow and silent. He thought of every species he'd studied, how they built armor, exosuits, redundancies, and how humans built none of that. They built themselves. When they were abandoned in a war zone, they reinforced their ribs with surgical wire. When they ran out of splints, they used bracing rods and pressure clamps, and walked anyway. When the world broke, they broke with it, but slower, deliberately. And with every break, they got smarter. Not because they were perfect, but because they refused to stay shattered. The directive finally came down from Coalition High Command 2 weeks later. Not a full policy shift, not an acknowledgement of wrongdoing. Just a revision. All medical scans involving humans must include integrated structure review. Any anomalous skeletal reinforcements should be flagged but not interfered with unless immediately life-threatening. Patients are not required to explain modifications. Assume intent. It was the last line that mattered. Assume intent. It wasn't a technical adjustment. It was philosophical. It meant the upgrades weren't mistakes. They weren't aberrations. They were decisions. Respected ones. Dr. Rive Exel stood in his office as he read the final copy. He read it again, slowly. Then he tapped his archive terminal and opened the original scan, the one of Logan Brooks, taken that first chaotic day, with metal winding through his ribs and forearms, his vertebrae glinting with reinforcement that had seemed impossible. It no longer seemed impossible. It seemed inevitable. The Coalition launched a new medical orientation series for incoming surgical teams. Rive was asked to contribute. He declined a public appearance, but sent in a segment. It was just a voiceover. No names. No images. Just one case study after another. One soldier who ran 20 kilometers on a fractured ankle braced with wire. Another who pulled 3 wounded comrades from a wreckage with a back reinforced by 6 ceramic-anchored vertebrae. One who had a full ulna shattered and fused mid-field using a heat-bonded plate sterilized over a fire. Each had survived. Each had healed. Each had returned to fight again. In his closing statement, Rive said this: "When you treat a human patient, you may think you're patching injuries. Sometimes you're witnessing innovation. They do not wait for the perfect conditions to survive. They make survival happen, even if it costs them part of themselves. And they do it without asking us for permission." The segment was watched more than any other module. 6 months passed. Riv was relocated to the outer ring of Delta Kelvin 4, where the war had first dropped Logan Brooks into his surgical bay. He didn't volunteer, he was requested. The ground unit needed someone who knew how to treat trauma in people who might have rebuilt themselves between check-ins. The med bay there was crude, a single operating unit, portable scan equipment, half the inventory of a standard surgical suite. But the first patient Rive saw was a human, and he didn't hesitate. The man had a split scapula and a dislocated clavicle, but embedded under the pectoral ridge, Rive spotted a dense metallic node, a flat panel bonded beneath the collarbone, acting as a brace to absorb impact shock. He didn't touch it. He worked around it. He asked only one question: "When did you install it?" The soldier blinked. "Last winter. Took a pipe to the chest in a tunnel collapse. Didn't want to risk a repeat." Riv nodded. "Smart placement." That was it? No ethics debates, no bureaucratic forms, just medicine and respect. On his 38th day in the field, Rive returned to the med bay late from a supply run to find a new chart on his desk. Patient name? Brooks, Logan. He froze. The details were vague. Minor laceration, suspected impact contusion, mild dehydration. No major trauma. Rive walked to the curtain and stepped through. Logan Brooks sat on the edge of the exam table, shirt off, left arm bruised along the biceps. "Wasn't expecting to see you out here," he said. "Likewise. You treating or observing?" "Both, if you'll allow it." Brooks flexed his fingers. Still intact. Rive scanned him quickly. The old upgrades were still there. Ribs, spine, forearms. A few new ones, too. A small ridge under the humerus. A plate behind the scapula. Riv nodded at them. "You did more work." "Had to. Got too good at walking away from things that should have killed me." "And the others?" "Some of them followed suit. Others didn't need to. We don't push it, just share what we learn." Riv cleaned the wound on Brooks's arm, checked for swelling, and applied a narrow film sealant. As he worked, he said, "You're changing how we practice medicine." Brooks raised an eyebrow. That a compliment? Is a realization. They sat in silence for a while, the hum of the power core the only sound in the background. Brooks finally said, "You remember when I told you upgrades were about survival?" "Yes. It's not just about staying alive, it's about returning to the fight better than we were. Every scar, every break, it teaches something. I just decided not to wait for someone else to build the answer. You built it into your bones. And I'll keep doing it. More blueprint than biology. You'll leave behind a body that's more blueprint than biology." Brooks shrugged. "Better than leaving behind nothing." As he stood to leave, Rive called out, "Do you ever stop?" Brooks paused at the door, only when everyone else is safe. Then he walked into the dusk light, his silhouette casting a long shadow down the corridor. In the end, the coalition never released a full study. Not because they couldn't. Because they realized it wouldn't change what was already happening. The humans didn't wait for policy. They never had. They would keep upgrading, keep reinforcing, keep turning their injuries into infrastructure. And every time a surgeon opened a human chest or scanned a limb that shouldn't function, they would remember that what looked like damage was often design. That beneath the skin and the pain and the improvised scars, there was something harder than metal. Choice, preparedness, and the refusal to break the same way twice.